Welcome, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu
So
la'asok
perfect.
b'divrei Torah. Okay.
Okay.
So we have quite a little bit to do in this one chapter, chapter 14. And so at this point, we're talking about how Abraham and his people in his household, Eliezer included, pursued the four kings, right? And they got to Dan. ויחלק עלחהם לילה הוא, and they split up. That is, Abraham's party split up. The posse split up over them. Layla who that night. By the way, this is the commentary that we had. Remember how Torah Temimah mentioned that it says Layla who instead of Layla hahu, and that's because Layla ends with a hey, and hahu would start with a hey as well. So that Laila Hu is not really a grammatical form in Hebrew, but Laila Hahu would mean that night. Avadav, right, and his servants, Vayakem, and he smote them, right? So this sentence, let's finish the sentence, but we'll see. Vayir defame ad Chova, and they pursued them up until Chova, it's the name of a place, Asher mismol Damascus, which is, let's see, that would be west of Damascus. Okay. So this sentence, the syntax of this sentence is really weird. Okay. It's not easy syntax at all. Okay. And so we're going to take a look and see what happens. This again is a reasonably well-known comment, right? Vayichalek alahem Laila, right? They split up over them, they split the party at night. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, said Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan is, as I said, a very, very important Amora. Oto malach, that angel, shenizdamen lo la'Avraham, who appeared to Abraham, right? He happened to be assisting Abraham, came, Layla Shmur. The name of that angel is Layla, night, right? That's the name of that angel. Going on here. Shinemar, how do we know this? In Job chapter 3, it says, Vahalayla Amar Hora Gaver. It says, and the night said, a man has been conceived. Right. Now, this word hora, right, moreh, it's one of the first words you learn when you study Hebrew, which is that the word moreh means to teach, right? A moreh is a teacher, right? The word Torah could be translated as teaching, capital T. But the word, as you see how I mentioned, also means to conceive. Herayon is pregnancy. It also can mean to decide, right? Moreh halacha is someone who is able to teach halacha, teach Jewish law. And I was thinking to myself, it made me realize this word, right? How it connects the idea of teaching, right? Making decisions with conception, right? The whole idea of coming up with something new, giving birth to an idea. And but at any rate, this verse in Job, the knight said, right, a man, right, has been taught, we'd say, is how he seems to be teaching, how he seems to be understanding. Rabbi Yochanan seems to be understanding this. I'm going to take a look at Torah Temimah here. So we're looking at the footnote Yud Aleph. Hotzi hamila mipshata, okay, or mifishta. So he says he interprets this word Lila, which simply, right on a simple level, it means when did they pursue them? They divided up, they were pursuing them, night fell, and they decided they needed to split the posse up because the enemy was scattering and it was nighttime. It's not like what is causing Rabbi Yochanan to have to take this word Lila and give it a whole new kind of meaning. That's what he's answering, right? Mishum, and he says, de lefi pshuto, because if it simply were to be understood in its simple meaning, heve biur ha'inyan, we would have to explain this matter, shenit chalek hu v'avadav, that he and his servants split up alehem, over them, by Layla, at night, kederech harodfim, just in the normal way that pursuers mitpalgim, they split up achar hanordafim, after those who are being pursued, kesheborchim ze lakan v'ze lakan, when some of the pursuers are splitting up and some of them are fleeing to this area or in this direction, and the others in the other direction. Rashi b'pasuk and as Rashi explains regarding this particular verse, the imkain. So this is Rashi's words, right? The imkain, and if this is the case, in other words, if all it meant, or unless it may not be Rashi's words, I'm sorry, it doesn't. I don't think it says zeh lashano, so it's okay. It's just simple. Sorry, just explaining, right? Uh, if in fact it were to mean simply the meaning that the simple meaning, right, that it just meant that, hava le'lemar, the sentence should have read differently. Vayechalek alehem v'hu avadav balayla. It should have said, he and his servants split over them, split their party that night. And it doesn't, right? So that's, again, going into the syntax of the sentence. I want to go back to look at the verse, right? Look at this. Vayelech alehem Layla hu, and then it says va'avadav. So va'avadav is translated. It should have said vayechalech alehem hu va'avadav balayla hahu, right? And it doesn't. It doesn't. So that's why the fact that the syntax is somewhat tortured is the reason why he is going in this direction. Right. Let's see. Let me see. One moment. I want to make sure I've got. Yep. Here we go. Umefaresh, and he explains. In other words, what's this explain? The hamalach hamamuneh al halayla, that angel that is appointed over the night, nilcham ba'ado. What it's trying to say is that the angel that is assigned to the nighttime was battling on his behalf, on behalf of Abraham. Umasmich milashon v'halayla amar hora gaver, and he says, and he's basing this on another expression where it talks about the night said, right? So in other words, that it isn't simply nighttime, but that there was an angel by the name of Layla that declared as a man has been conceived, v'ulai hakavana, and possibly the intention is she'oto hamalach, that particular angel horag vura b'milchama v'tzarich iyon. So I believe in this case, hora is having to do with the idea of teaching, something like that, or I'm trying to think how we can say that through this angel, Gvura, power, was brought in the war. But Tzarich, and he says this requires further investigation, further thought. One of the things I think is, again, so what's the real point that Rabbi Yochanan is making in this particular comment of his? I think on a simple level, of course, the whole idea that Abraham and his party would be able to defeat four kings that had such a successful campaign, that they were able to do that Rabbi Yochanan is saying, well, Abraham had like some supernatural assistance in this particular matter. Does this go totally out of the realm of credibility? Not always. I think that, when it comes to battles and things, they don't always go to the larger number or the more powerful group. There are many factors that can influence the course of a war. A lot of it, I think, also has to do with psychology and how and the sense of security and confidence that the parties have, etc. So at any rate, this could be one way in which Rabbi Yochanan is expressing that. But we have to go on, plow on. The yoter mizeh, and more than this, it would appear, the lo garsinan klal kan hai shine'emar v'halayla amar v'gomer. What he's saying here is that it would appear that we're not supposed to include, in other words, this little passage that we included from Job, this quote from Job, shouldn't actually be in the text. So what Torah Temimah is doing is saying we have a corrupt text, and that particular somewhat troublesome quote from Job, which doesn't really seem to prove the point, actually shouldn't be in the text at all, right? Garsinan Klalkan, we do not, Garsinan, Girsa is a version of the text. In other words, this we should not be putting this into the text at all. That which is the quote, Shinemar, that where it says Vinemar, Halayla, Amar Horagaver. That verse should not be included in this particular passage, right? Venishtar bev halashon kan, and the language became confused here, me'inyan acher, from a different idea. Okay, mima shekatuv b'midah tet zayin bet, and in order to sort of clarify this, he says if you look at the tractate Nida, page 16b, Oto malach, I guess there it says, Oto malach shememune al herayon Layla shmo. There it says, remember this word ora, right? That angel, which is appointed regarding conception, the name of that angel is Layla. Now that's different, right, from the idea of going on here, where we're talking about a battle and we're not saying that there was conception going on, right? We're pushing a different understanding of the word more, right? Shne'emar, as it says, and there it quotes, V'halayla amar horagaver. There it says, and nighttime stated, a man has been conceived. Yes, Judith. Judith, you need to unmute.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Go on. I can hear you now.
This is, I guess, this is a diversion from what you're talking about, but why don't we ever talk about angels other than as messengers of God, and what's the message?
Okay. All right.
So not necessarily to be dealt with today, but could we
Right. No,
address
no,
it?
no. I'm okay. Yeah. No, I will try and deal with it since you asked the question. I will try and work with it a little bit. It seems to me, first of all, that the word malach has more to do with an agent rather than a messenger. Okay. So, and I think it's a way of trying to explain the transcendent level of the divine and its connection to this physical world. The use of angels is a way of saying that there's some intermediary force, and that it requires some sort of intermediary force in order for the divine to actually have influence in this world. So I think it's a way of underscoring, we talk sometimes about God's transcendence, meaning the degree to which God is so totally different from the universe that we experience. And we also talk about God's immanence, which means sort of the presence of God, the sense in which God is present in the world that we experience. And I think that we don't want to identify the world with God. Apparently, that is what Spinoza does. In other words, that's called pantheism, where the world itself, the physical world itself, is understood as the nature of the divine. Judaism, I don't believe, accepts that at all. I think that part of the idea of belief in one God, which, as you know, is a fundamental core belief in Judaism, is also that one includes the concept of uniqueness, that God is totally different from the world in which we live and the world which God created. But at the same time, it raises issues that require some meditation and thought regarding the relationship that God has to this world. And the angels are a way of using language to try to explain in some way or another that the fact that God has a causal relationship with this world. So that's my understanding of the nature of angels and talking about God being angels. I would add one more piece to this. What I think is also profound is that angels essentially they simply perform the will of God. They are simply extensions of divine will, right? They can't argue. They do. God tells them, if they ask anything, they would say, God says jump, they would say, how high? That's the only question they'd ever ask, if they ever did, and I don't think they do. I think they sort of almost act automatically. In this regard, following mitzvot, commandments, become extremely significant in the sense that if we as Jews perform, or as human beings, perform divine commandments, we are actually acting like angels. We ourselves become angels. So that you could say that the discipline of Judaism is trying to be an angel training discipline. So, and that's what I am going to say about this. So going on. Going on. Okay, so let's find out where we are here, right here. Okay, Ulech. I think, I'm not sure if this is a kaf or it's a misprinted pay. Okay, but maybe this is a nun. This should be a nun. V'lachein, and for this reason, tidok besugya sham. If you actually examine the sugya, is that portion, that passage in the Talmud in Nida that he's been quoting. If you actually look at that passage, timtza, you will find smuchim, support. The lo garsina zekan, that particular passage that is not supposed to be here, that is here being the passage talking about Layla assisting Abraham, right? That using that quote from Job to support Rabbi Yochanan's contention, that is not going to, it should not be put here. Remember, he's saying this is a misplaced quote and that the text we have here is corrupt, right? Why? Ya'an de amalusham. Because if you look at that passage in Nida, you see that the scholars are working very hard. They're struggling there. Limtzor drasha al pasuk zeh, to find an interpretation regarding this verse. Levad otad drasha shehevenu. Besides the one saying that the angel Layla is the one that is appointed regarding, I believe this is what he's saying, right? Okay. The over conception. That Lila is the name of the angel that is appointed regarding conception, right? So they try to find let's see, right? They trust. No, I'm going to back up. Al pasuk ze levad otad rasha. Right. Besides that particular part, that particular verse, shehevenu, that we brought, v'lo zachru klal hadrasha shelefanenu, and they don't mention at all this drash that is before us. So what he's referring here, okay? I'm trying to find. Right. Okay. Right. So sorry. They were trying. It seems to me that what he's saying here is trying to think that they're trying to find an interpretation for this verse, Laila Amar Hora Gaver, right? They're trying to find another, I think it looks to me like they, hold on a second, forgive me. Right, right. They do not find that verse here. Ya'an, right. So that says because they try to find a drasha regarding this verse, besides that drasha, that shevenu, velo zachru klal hadrasha shelefanenu, and they do not include this particular verse. Okay, so please forgive me because I'm not certain now. I'm a little bit confused myself as to the point that he's making. So allow me to review what's going on. Okay. Okay. So we've got the fact that in Nida they're talking about, and let's see where this is. Yeah, okay. Forgive me. This in Nida they decide that this verse proves this Halayla Amar Hora Gaber proves that the angel regarding in charge of conception is known as Layla. Okay, and I'm looking to see, and this passage that he's talking about here is from Sanhedrin, right? And I believe so. What it would appear to be saying, what he's been saying, okay. So when he says Lavad otad rasha she'evenu, see. So it seems to me that he's saying that the only interpretation they have for this particular verse, is that the angel in charge of conception is Lila, and they do not use this verse to support what we just said that Lila helped Abraham. They do not use this pasuk, is the point I believe he's making. And if this was in fact a support that Lila assisted Abraham, they would use this particular verse, and they don't. Okay, and I'm not sure if he's referring to Nida here. Okay, v'lo zachru klal hadashah. V'shuv ra'ita, and he says, and again he says in another place, ra'iti, he saw. Okay, um, I think this to me. I would explain this acronym as b'divrei sofrim, right? Something it could be a work called a divrei sofrim, the words of the sofrim the people who were scribes. Nuschat Shas Ketiv Yad, a version of the Talmud that was in manuscript form, Kitvei Yad, right? Be'emet Chaser Kan, that in fact, so it could be that he's talking about the track. He's saying, right, the passage that he initially cited was from Sanhedrin, right? This is from Sanhedrin, and he's saying that he saw a version that was quoting a manuscript version of the Talmud of, I believe, Sanhedrin, right? That be'emet chaser kan hay shene'emar. He says in that manuscript version of Sanhedrin, of the Talmud Sanhedrin, this particular quote, this shene'emar v'halayla, right? That supportive verse that it's as it says in the Layla, etc., is missing. Chaser kan, it's missing. Ubaruch Hashem, and he's saying, and thank God, ki hinchani b'sha'ara amitit, that in the fact that he had this suspicion, and he subsequently found support. In other words, he suspected that this verse, and it was giving him trouble as to how this verse from Job was a support for this idea of Lila being the angel that helped Abraham. He wasn't happy with it. And he says, thank God, he actually found support for the fact that he thought this verse shouldn't be there. It should not be acting as a supportive verse. V'chein leita ze b'menorat ha'maor, and he says likewise, this verse is excluded from this work called Menorat Ha'or, right? I have a footnote at the bottom of this page where I did a little bit of research regarding what is the Menorat Ha'or. It is extant, okay, but makom shehevi agadaza, in a place where he brings this agadic portion, and down here I have Menorat Ha'or is a 14th century work by Rabbi Israel al-Naqwa. That's one. It's interesting because I found two versions. I thought it was actually attributed to Rabbi Isaac Abwab. Whether this is one and the same person, although Yisrael and Isaac are not the same words, written in simple and accessible Hebrew. So the Menurat Ha'or, as I said, I actually had a copy of this. Whether I still do, I'm not certain. but it basically, that particular work that they're referring to has the Agadic sessions of the Talmud, and also what the author did was to take the Aramaic and the other elements that make it hard to access in straightforward Hebrew. So okay, so we just had a major this particular verse should not be here. It shouldn't be included. But Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha Amar, and Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha said, She'asa imo ma'aseh Layla, right? That he did for him, this is, I believe, the angel he's referring to, it did for him the work of night, Shine'emar, and his proof text is in Judges chapter 5, Mina shamayim nilchamu hakochavim bimesulotehem. From the heavens, the stars came off their tracks and battled. Okay, so all right, I think that may be a reference to the Song of Deborah. I'm not certain, but I think it could be against Sisera. In other words, that he had divine support, right? It is right. Ritzono Lamar, that is what he wants to say, is Shenilchamu imo kochvei Laila. That is to say that the stars of the night, there's this word Laila, kamo besisera. So forgive me, I had actually prepared this, and because of my fabulous short-term memory, I had not actually remembered that he says explicitly that that's from the Song of Deborah and mentions it right there. Okay. And that's where we will have to stop for today. So, okay, I will stop the share. Any questions or comments? I know this was quite challenging in terms of understanding Torah Temimah and his critique of the text itself, and saying that this verse that was there actually shouldn't have been there. Okay, and I'm going to stop the recording.